greatest on his track.
All right. Thanks, Chuck. Okay, I made a couple of notes so I don't forget. Two things I want to say before I get started here. One thing is that, especially when I'm talking about Brunswick, sooner or later during the speech I'll choke up. It's like I have an adrenal gland that says, okay, you reached the point, it's time to cry now. And it happens almost every time, so it's nothing. So don't even worry about it. The other thing is that I'm a history nut. I think that history is very, very important. And that the more you know about something, the better you are at understanding, performing, where loyalty comes from. We study in school how our forefathers sacrificed so that we can have freedom, and that's why we are the way we are. And if we ask to go into service or whatever to defend the country, we never want to lose our freedom. It's the same way in sports. If kids are playing Little League ball, their dream is to eventually get into the major leagues. And if you ask the Little Leaguers, when you get into the major leagues, would you rather play for the New York Yankees or the Tampa Bay Rays? And most of the kids are going to say, I want to play for the New York Yankees because of the history of the Yankees. Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle, Derek Jeter. It's all about history. And the same thing applies to companies. And the same thing applies when we talk about Brunswick. John Brunswick formed the corporation in 1845. He was a cabinet maker and also made those beautiful mahogany bars that you see, especially in the old pictures, and eventually started making pool tables, and then eventually bowling balls, pins, lanes, the whole bit. He had a daughter, and she married a man named Moses Bensinger. And when John Brunswick died, Moses Bensinger became the president of Brunswick. They had a son named Benjamin, and eventually when Brunswick got into bowling, when he grew up, he became the president of the bowling and billiard division. And we're talking about around 1890. In 1895, he found all of the instrumental people in the sport of bowling at that time, and they had a meeting in New York City, and they formed the American Bowling Congress. And at that time, bowling was getting very popular across the country, but it was also in chaos. And depending on where you were in the country, there were bowling balls that weren't even the same size from one city to the other. They didn't even have that down. It took them 5 years to get all the rules in place and get everybody to agree. And then in 1901 was the first ABC tournament. And at that first ABC tournament, now things got going, starting in 1901. And in 1906, Brunswick came out with the Mineral Light bowling ball. Because prior to that, everybody was using a conventional two-fingered ball. Now, all of a sudden, they had a rubber ball in their hand. The person that completely dominated the game at that time was a bowler named Jimmy Smith. For the first quarter of a century, he was the best there was. And Brunswick had signed him back in 1906 when the rubber bowling balls came out. And Jimmy Smith used rubber through his whole career. He was the first one to shoot 1900 in the ABCs. He did it twice before anybody ever did it once. And as time went by and he got older, he started doing exhibitions across the country, always in a center that he might never have been in before, on strange lanes. It is estimated that he bowled 12,000 games for the company over that period of time. And eventually, people that kept track said for those 12,000 games, he averaged 205. Talking about a bowler in the 1920s and 30s. So let's fast forward to the end of World War II. At the end of World War II, on the female side, a bowler was emerging that would completely dominate the game. Her name was Marion Ladderwick. From 1950 to 1960, Marion, who had signed with Brunswick and was now bowling with Brunswick, was Woman Bowler of the Year 9 times in 10 years. She won the All-Star 5 years in a row. And one of the years that she won, one of the years that Don Carter won the All-Star, she averaged higher than Don Carter in that tournament to win that All-Star. So now it's 1960. And in 1960, I'm 13 years old. And they put 2 lanes in Madison Square Garden, right where the Knicks play. And Don Carter, Dick Weber, Marion Ladderwood came in to do an exhibition. And me and all my 13-year-old friends, we can't wait to get there. And we're going to watch the 3 icons of the Sport Bowl. This is going to be great. And Don Carter at that time was on Brunswick. So was Marion Ladderwood. Dick Weber was with AMF. There was one other person there that we found out about when we got there. Her name was Judy Audsley. She was the other girl that was going to bowl. She was 16 years old, 5 feet, 90 pounds. And she had done so much at that age, and Brunswick saw this, that Brunswick signed her when she was 16. And when they started bowling, we were just amazed. How could this little 16-year-old girl be that good? And she's throwing a 16-pound ball. And here she is appearing with the 3 icons of the sport. By the time the exhibition was over and we could ask questions and talk to them and interact with them, you know, I'm hooked. I want to be a professional bowler. I want to be like these people. This is what I want to do. In the case of Judy Audsley, well, they were right about her. She ends up Bowler of the Year twice. She marries a guy named John Cook, and she becomes Judy Cook. They end up getting divorced, and then she marries Dave Sutar, and today she's Judy Sutar. Now, as time goes by, at the age of 66, Judy Sutar retires from the game. At the age of 66, her 50th year with Brunswick. From the time she was 16 to the time her career was over, she was with Brunswick. Her husband, Dave Sutar, he retired at the age of 71, all his years with Brunswick. Dave Davis retired at the age of 65, all of his years with Brunswick. So how come? You know, this is only a few of the people that were with Brunswick, because there's a lot of other stories, but all of them spent their whole career with Brunswick. I'll give you one little part of where I think this comes from. At the end of the winter tour in '71, I had a good winter. I come home, I get a call from AMF. And the guy's name was Henry Caven, who was in charge of the AMF staff at that time. And Henry Caven was a wonderful guy. I really liked him a lot. And Henry Caven spoke with a lisp. And he offered me a contract on the phone. We'd like to have you on AMF staff. Here's the contract. And he made an offer. And I said, okay, Henry, I'll think about it. I'll let you know. And then he says, one more thing, John. If you, like, it's hard to do a lisp, but he says, one thing is, if you decide to sign with AMF, it's going to be in the contract that you're going to have to go to speech school and get rid of your Brooklyn accent. So this is what he tells me. Then I got a call from Ebonite. And this is exactly how it went. I can't remember the guy's name, but he called up and he said, we'd like to know if you'd like to be on Ebonite staff. And I said, well, sure, I'm interested. He said $250 a month, $250 a day in exhibition free equipment. So I said, you know, I was looking more for like $350, and he said, no, wait a minute. Don't go any further. He says, we have 12 guys on Ebonite staff. Don Carter has a special deal. The other 11 guys get the same pay. Everybody gets $250 a month. And I started thinking, Carmen Salvino has 12 titles. 3 or 4 guys on the staff have no titles, and they're all getting the same pay. Is he just telling me that there is no advancement? If I'm Bowler of the Year next year, I still get $250 a month? Am I a human, or am I part of the equipment here? What's going on? So it felt like sort of a non-starter. I said, I'll let you know, and that was the end of that call. And then I get a call from Brunswick, and the guy's name is Larry Parker, who, by the way, is still alive. He's in his 90s. And Larry Parker says to me on the phone, John, I'd like to talk to you about consideration for Brunswick staff. And I said, oh, well, I'm interested, Larry. And now I'm expecting to hear him mention a contract like the other 2 companies did. Larry Parker says, do you have a favorite restaurant in Brooklyn? And I said, yeah. And he says, why don't we have dinner there tomorrow night? My treat. Bring your parents. Okay, I give him the restaurant. He flies in from Chicago, and we meet at the restaurant. We have a very nice dinner. We talk about my goals. We talk about Brunswick's goals. We never talk about contract. He doesn't bring it up, so I don't bring it up. And after it's over, he says, I'll be in touch. He goes back to the airport to fly back to Chicago. I'm going home with my parents. And my father says, well, now I know who you're going to sign with. And I said, you do? And he says, yeah, you're going to sign with Brunswick. And I said, how do you know that? He says, if Larry calls you tomorrow, that's who you sign with. He said, this dinner had nothing to do with whether or not you want to be on Brunswick staff. This had everything to do with, are you the kind of person that's going to represent the company the way they want it represented? So I said, okay, Dad. He goes, remember this. He goes, the company that's interested in you more than just throwing strikes is the company you sign with. And Larry called the next day, and I signed on Brunswick staff. That was 48 years ago, you know, as far as who's making the right decision and what I got from my dad. You know. So now the next part that I'm going to tell you here, this is totally my opinion, okay? Let me get that so that if other Brunswick people don't think the same way, I want you to know it's my opinion. And if you're going, as I'm telling you this next part, if you're saying, why is he telling us this? I promise I'll wrap it up for you at the end and explain why. In 1957, the position of Brunswick salesperson opens in the state of Wisconsin. And just give me a second, okay? It opens in the state of Wisconsin. And we had a staffer at that time, Ned Day. Ned Day, two-time bowler of the year, USBC Hall of Famer. Great, great talent. He tells his boss at Brunswick, he's a kid that just graduated college. He just graduated from the University of Wisconsin. Loves the game of bowling. Is a really energetic, great guy. I think you should interview him. I think he could be great for this job. And because of the recommendation coming from Ned Day, they interview Jack Reichert. And Jack Reichert gets the job as salesman for the state of Wisconsin. And as time goes by, over the next about 25 years, Jack works his way all up to be the CEO of all of Brunswick Corporation. And at the time when Jack is CEO, understand at that time, 10% of the company is bowling and billiards. The rest of the company is Mercury engines, Sea Ray boats, Bayliner boats, Zebco fishing gear, Sherwood Medical, a lumber company, and a contract with NASA, where our engines they were using for the rockets at that time. So Jack has a ton on his plate when he's CEO. But Jack comes from bowling. And Jack never forgot that it was a bowler that gave him his first shot. I've talked to board members at that time, and they said that at the very first meeting with Reichert, that he was now the CEO, that he told everybody at the first meeting, we can discuss whatever we're going to discuss, what we're going to do with companies, how it's going to work, but nobody messes with bowling. Don't come to me and say, I want to sell bowling division, because it ain't going to happen. And we were protected, essentially, because Jack was the CEO as far as bowling goes. And the next thing that happened was that Jack knew from the beginning that for bowling to grow, it had to get into the Olympics. And from day one to the day that he retired, any biographical sketch that you read about Jack, or anytime you heard him in a speech, it was always, get bowling into the Olympics. How are we going to get bowling into the Olympics? When they had the Olympics in Barcelona, Spain, he literally built a bowling center inside the Olympic Village to get bowling into the Olympics. Not only for them to have recreation, but to show the IOC what bowling is all about. And after that Olympics was over, the president of the IOC, Juan Antonio Samaranch, he said, bowling is a sport that can be in the Olympic Games. But Jack couldn't do it alone. He had to have the industry go along with him. And the industry really wasn't backing him on that. They weren't ready to spend money on the Olympics. They just didn't think it was important enough. So Jack created the Brunswick Memorial World Open. Now we have a tournament that's on CBS instead of ABC, and instead of Schenkel doing the show, was Brent Musburger. Major format, 56 games, tremendous tournament. The one thing that was different is that they set up 20 tournaments in 20 different countries. And the winner of those 20 tournaments from all over the world were invited to come and bowl in the World Open. So he didn't get us into the Olympics, but he did get us bowling worldwide and started the sport to grow. And everything was going great as far as Jack was concerned. Brunswick was doing well, stock was going up, and he was always there to support the company. Now we'll go to the 1990s. And in the 1990s, the PBA is in complete free fall. They've lost ABC TV, they've lost Chris Schenkel, they're losing their sponsors, everything is going downhill. And then the big bombshell hits that Bridgestone, which is a Japanese company, buys Firestone. And Bridgestone is not interested in the Tournament of Champions. The PBA players' equity gets embezzled out of $2 million, and the PBA is ready to go under. There's not going to be a PBA anymore. Mark Gerberick sends out a letter to the industry, and it says that if we can't get a sponsor for the Tournament of Champions, the Tournament of Champions is going to pay $10,000 first this year. And essentially, we're out of business. It'll be over for the PBA. At that time, Jack calls for a meeting. Nobody else in the industry steps up. Jack calls for a meeting, and even though a couple of department heads are against him, he says, we are going to save the PBA. We're going to sponsor the TSC, but we're going to do more than that. We're the #1 company in bowling, and we're going to do more. So he sends a proposal to Mark Gerberick at the PBA. He says, we'll give you a 3-year contract, $1 million a year for 3 years. We'll sponsor 4 events. One of those events will terminate the Brunswick Memorial World Open, and it will become the Brunswick World Tournament of Champions. And the only stipulation that I have is those 20 winners from around the world have to be invited to bowl in the TSC. Mark Gerberick agrees, and we have a contract. And the PBA is saved for 3 years. As it's coming to an end of the 3-year contract, that's when Mark Gerberick meets Chris Peters, and he and the 2 billionaires, Clay and Frazier, Slade and what's the other one? Yeah, and Glazer. They buy the PBA. And if Jack Reichert wasn't there, if he doesn't give the 3-year extension to the PBA, there would have been no PBA to buy, and we'd be doing something else for a living. And then we become, the first time we're owned. Up until then we were association, and that's where we are now. Now we're owned. When Jack went into the USBC Hall of Fame, he said in his speech, even though I'm getting ready to retire, I'm going to drag all of you kicking, biting, scratching into the Olympics. We're going to get there. And he tried as hard as he could, but it never ever happened. When the Hall of Fame opened in Dallas, and you go see it the next time you're there, Jack doesn't have a picture or a plaque on the wall. He has his own room. There's a Jack Reichert room. The industry, it's almost like their way to apologize that we were wrong this whole time and he was right, okay? And everything he did was about bowling and loyalty to Brunswick. When you go into a big time person's office and you see the sign that, you know, vice president, CEO, and then they have their name with that plate on the desk, on Jack's desk it said, if it's good for bowling, it's good for Brunswick. That's all he had there. Yeah. So why am I telling you all of this? I'm telling you this because the employees of Brunswick, and especially the people at the top, are cut from the same cloth. There's every once in a while a leader comes along that filters down to everybody else. Our former boss here, Brent Perrier, died about a year ago, unfortunately. When he got hired by Brunswick, he worked under Jack. And the loyalties and everything and the knowledge that Brent had toward the company came from him. And if you check, you see Corey works for Brent. Brian Graham works for Corey. And then we're down to Chuck, and then we're all the way down to the pro staff. And, well, when everything that I learned from Jack 30 years ago when we signed Parker, everything I ever learned, I told him. And what's the end result? Well, the end result is they're sitting right there. We have Parker and we have Walter. We got the best representative in the game right here. And we have Walter Ray. They are completely different personalities. But there's one thing they have in common, besides their 82 titles, is both of them, from the day that from the minute they step on the lanes to the minute that they step off the lanes, they give 100%, from the first ball to the last ball. And the same thing happens when they're on exhibition. We don't have to worry about anything about how they're going to represent the company. And that's not an easy thing to do. This past year at the Senior US Open, with 3 games to go, I was so frustrated that I gave up the last 3 games. But that will never happen again. You know, 54 years on tour, and you still learn. You always learn. So now we have the responsibility of the pro staff that goes to Chuck Gardner. And you're out there, you see it, where the passion he has and how much he's really into it. On the ladies tour, on the national tour, on the senior tour, it doesn't make any difference. The passion is there, and he's constantly looking not only for talent, but he's looking for character. The company that cares more about you than just throwing strikes is still the same. And all of this has always filtered down, I feel, as I watch the changes in people over the years when I look at Brunswick. I remember from the beginning, and when people came in, that the names and faces would change in those positions, but they would always be the same. And they would be a good person, but little by little, they would become a better person as time went by that worked for the company. I see it all the time. I feel it. I sense it. I see it in Corey, right away. And Brian Graham and Chuck as we're coming down the line. And now we get to the point of you guys, okay? And you're going to now go out there and bowl, and what you should be thinking about now when you go out there is that you're representing a company. You have the knowledge and the pride that you're representing a company that has always been there from the beginning and as always will be there. And you're our future. You're the future of Brunswick, you guys that are sitting here right now. And what you have to remember, just like it's happened for the last 120 years, that you're our future and we got your back. So go get them. Make us proud. Thanks.